He thought he was surprising his sons. Just a quick visit, a quiet moment. But when he walked into that classroom, he saw something he wasn't ready for. His twin boys were already standing beside someone else. Not a teacher, not family. The maid. She was holding their Mother's Day card, and the way they looked at her changed everything. He had no idea they invited her. And what happened next? He never told anyone. Until now. It wasn't planned. There was no conversation. No hint. Just a moment that changed what he thought he knew. Jonathan Scott was never the forgetful type, especially not today. Mother's Day. His wife, Margaret, died giving birth to the twins. And for 7 years, he did everything he could to make sure they didn't feel that hole too deeply. This year he cleared his meetings, put on the tie she gave him, showed up early at St. Edmund's, a school where image matters and grief is kept polite. He didn't tell the boys he was coming. He just wanted to be there to surprise them, to make the day easier. But when he stepped into the classroom, everything stopped. Laughter, voices, movement, all of it paused. Because there they were, his sons, not looking for him, not holding space beside an empty chair, but standing beside her. Evelyn James, the maid, 28, hired after Margaret's death. She was dressed in something soft, no apron, no clipboard, just a blue dress she probably saved for something else. And in her hand, a red paper heart, their Mother's Day card. Jonathan stood frozen. Because the truth hit harder than he expected. They didn't ask him to come. They didn't ask permission. They didn't wait. They chose her. And whatever this moment was, it wasn't a mistake. One of the twins leaned his head on her arm. The other smiled like this was exactly how it was supposed to be. And Evelyn, she looked like someone trying to hold it together. Not because she wanted to be their mother, but because maybe God let her fill a space they didn't know how to name. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, didn't even move. He just watched. And in that moment, everything he thought he was managing so well quietly fell apart. Before we begin Chapter 1, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And I hope this story reminds you of something simple but true. God doesn't always fix the loss, but sometimes He sends someone to sit in the ache with you. And that kind of love, it's never just coincidence. It started with a red paper heart. Not the kind sold in stores, not the perfect kind. The kind a 7-year-old cuts slowly, jagged edges, smudged crayon, bent down the middle from too many folds. In Mrs. Ellison's Year 1 class, the desks were covered in glitter dust and glue sticks, the windows fogged with the breath of children laughing too loud. Everywhere, kids were whispering about Sunday brunch and perfume gifts. They compared cards and asked each other what color their mums would wear. At the back table, John and Kevin Scott worked in silence. Same posture, same serious faces, identical red blazers buttoned to the top. They didn't giggle, they didn't rush, they just folded, carefully. They knew they were supposed to feel something today, but feelings had become tricky in their house. They came in sudden waves, or not at all. Mrs. Ellison passed by and placed a hand gently on Kevin's back. "You boys
John
doing
gave
okay?"
the smallest
nod. Kevin didn't look up. They were used to this, the soft voices, the sideways glances, the well-meaning concern. But they weren't sad. Not exactly. They were waiting for something they couldn't name. That afternoon, while other kids ran to their mums with cards flying in their backpacks, the twins walked slowly down the school steps. The driver waited at the curb in the usual black sedan, but they didn't rush. John held the folded heart like it might rip if the wind touched it. Back home, Evelyn James was finishing the dishes. The house was quiet in the kind of way that felt too big, like the silence stretched into every corner. She didn't mind it. She'd gotten used to the echo of grief. She wore a sweatshirt and house slippers, her hair tied loosely, sleeves damp from rinsing the boys' water bottles. When she heard the door open, she dried her hands, not expecting anything more than snack requests or muddy shoes. But when she turned the corner, she found them standing still in the foyer. Kevin's backpack hung off one shoulder. John was holding something behind his back. He stepped forward, his shoes making no sound on the marble floor. Then, without a word, he handed her the heart. Crayon scrawled across the front in crooked letters, "Will you come?" She blinked. "Come where?" Kevin looked up. "To the Mother's Day tea." Evelyn froze. The moment landed in her chest like something heavy. She looked at the card again, at the boys, at the way Kevin's voice trembled just slightly when he added, "Only if you want to." She didn't speak right away, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she didn't want to say the wrong thing. "I'm not your mum," she said gently. John shrugged. "We know." "But you make the house feel like it used to feel," Kevin whispered. Evelyn felt it then, that sting behind the eyes, the one she'd learned to blink away. She looked down at the card, felt the crease in the middle from John's careful fold, the crayon rubbing off on her thumb. "If the school says it's okay," she said softly, "I'd be honored." She didn't say it with excitement. She said it like a promise, quiet and sacred. They nodded, then walked off toward the living room, as if they hadn't just broken something open. Evelyn stood there alone, holding the heart, and in that moment, and she knew, this wasn't about standing in for someone, this wasn't about pretending, this was about showing up. And when she looked up, she didn't notice the shadow just beyond the hallway, Jonathan Scott, still in his dress shirt, still holding the cufflink he hadn't fastened yet. He had heard only enough to feel it in his chest, and instead of stepping forward, he stepped back. Jonathan didn't ask that night, not about the card, not about the invitation. He came home late, as usual, quietly, the kind of late where you don't check your watch anymore. The townhouse was still. Dinner had already been cleared. The boys were upstairs, their laughter replaced by soft breathing behind closed doors. He found Evelyn in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, one hand steady, the other holding a folded tea towel. She looked up when he entered, gave a small smile, polite, tired, not forced, but not expecting anything either. "Boys asleep?" he asked. She nodded. "Just now." He reached for a glass from the cabinet, poured water from the fridge. The hum of the appliances filled the silence. There was something in the air, not tension, but the kind of space that forms when something hasn't been said yet. Evelyn didn't bring it up, neither did he. But when she started to leave, he asked, "What was the card?" She turned slowly. "Pardon?" "The one John gave you," he said, not looking up. "I saw it." She hesitated. Her fingers tightened slightly. "They invited me to the Mother's Day tea," she said gently. "No pressure, just a question." His jaw flexed, not with anger, but something closer to discomfort, noticing something too late. "And you said yes?" "I said I'd go if the school allows it." He nodded once. A long pause followed. Then he set the glass down. "They asked the maid to stand in for Margaret," he said flatly. More observation than question, but the words were cold in the air. Evelyn's breath caught. "I didn't ask them to," she said, quiet but steady. "I didn't expect it either. I didn't want to hurt them." Jonathan's face didn't change. He wasn't cruel, but something behind his eyes pulled back. "You know how people are," he muttered. "Parents, the board. That school lives on reputation. This could be misunderstood." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I understand," she said. "I haven't spoken to the school yet. If you'd prefer I don't go—" But he cut in. "It's not about what I prefer." He looked up at her then, for the first time tonight. "It's about how this looks. She was their mother. That space, it doesn't get replaced." Evelyn's voice dropped. "I never thought it did." They stood there still, not in conflict, but in a delicate space between caution and pain. She turned back toward the hallway, then paused. "They're not asking me to be her," she said without looking back. "They're asking someone to stand beside them, just for a day." He didn't answer. The moment passed. The fridge hummed again. She left the kitchen, and Jonathan stood alone, staring at the towel she'd left behind on the counter, folded neatly, one corner slightly frayed. He didn't sleep much that night. When he did, the dreams came back. Margaret's voice in pieces, a laugh cut off mid-sentence, the last time she touched his hand, right before they wheeled her away. He sat up in the dark. No lights, just the city outside, glass buildings glowing like they didn't know what grief was. He got up, walked the hallway like he always did when sleep wouldn't hold, stopped outside the twins' door. He heard them breathing, even soft, safe. Across the hall, a light was still on under the maid's door. He thought about knocking, but he didn't. He just stood there, listening. And somewhere, beneath the discomfort, beneath the walls he'd built around the space Margaret left behind, he felt something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Gratitude, not loud, not proud, just real. He didn't know what to do with it yet, but it was there, like a crack in the concrete, small, but growing. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day where everything felt normal on the surface. The boys left for school early, backpacks swinging off one shoulder, voices low and tired from a restless night. Jonathan had already left. No words that morning, just the usual note on the counter. Meeting at 10, back by 5. Evelyn moved through the house like always, picking up socks, closing drawers halfway open, rinsing cereal bowls still sticky with milk. She wasn't avoiding the conversation from the night before, but she wasn't chasing it either. Some walls in this house didn't fall from arguing. They cracked in silence. Upstairs, she entered Margaret's old study, now used for storage, boxes stacked against the far wall, an old desk pushed under the window. She didn't go in often, only when the boys needed something from the craft drawer. She knelt to pull it open, but the drawer stuck halfway, caught on something jammed at the back. She tugged once, then again. It gave, and what slipped loose was not glue or ribbon, but a notebook, spiral-bound, faded at the edges, a smudge of jam across the corner. Evelyn paused. It was Margaret's handwriting. She knew it instantly, neat cursive with little flourishes at the ends. She opened it slowly. It wasn't a journal. It was a recipe book, but not one copied from the internet or store-bought. This one was real, messy, alive. Kevin hates the crust. Cut them off. John likes strawberry, not raspberry. Always sing the second verse twice. They fall asleep by then. Evelyn sat back on her heels, breath catching in her throat. Each page held more than instructions. They held reminders, little pieces of a woman trying to hold on. One page was sticky, another had tear marks that dried into the paper, and then she saw it. A line scribbled across the top corner of a blank page. Tell them I love them, when they forget. Her chest tightened. The room felt heavier somehow, like the air was listening. She turned the page and pressed her hand flat against it. Like touching it might bring Margaret back. But Margaret wasn't coming back, and these boys, they were growing up in the echo of a love that hadn't had time to finish its story. Evelyn closed the book gently, sat with it in her lap. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she placed it on the counter downstairs, and that night she made their toast with no crust, strawberry jam, not raspberry. She hummed a tune she didn't know she knew until they started yawning at the exact moment she thought they would. At bedtime, she smoothed their blankets and kissed the tops of their heads. Neither boy asked where she learned those things. They just leaned into her hands and whispered, "Good night." And as she closed the door behind her, something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but felt, like grief stretching just enough to make space for someone else to stand beside it. Later that evening, Jonathan came home early, earlier than usual. He loosened his tie as he walked in, pausing when he saw the recipe book on the kitchen counter. He opened it, read the notes, the crumbs between pages, the handwriting he hadn't seen in years. He didn't ask Evelyn why it was out. He didn't have to. He just stood there a moment longer, then went upstairs to the boys' room. They were already asleep. He watched them for a long time. Then, slowly, carefully, he sat down at the edge of Kevin's bed. He reached out, paused, then gently brushed the hair from his son's forehead. His voice came out lower than usual, almost like it didn't want to break the quiet. "I'm sorry I don't know all the songs." Kevin stirred a little, eyes closed. "That's okay," he mumbled. "You don't have to sing." Jonathan nodded. He didn't try again, but he stayed. For the first time in months, he didn't go back to work, didn't check his phone, didn't scroll through emails on the hallway bench. He stayed, in that room, listening to the sound of his son's breathing. And somewhere downstairs, Evelyn turned the last page of the recipe book and whispered, "I'll tell them." The invitation sat on the counter for 2 days, folded, quiet, waiting. No one mentioned it. The boys didn't ask again, and Evelyn didn't bring it up. But every now and then she would catch one of them glancing at it, not touching, not opening, and just looking, like they were hoping it hadn't been forgotten. It was Wednesday afternoon when they asked to rehearse. Evelyn had just pulled a tray of biscuits from the oven, the whole kitchen warm with cinnamon and butter. Kevin stood by the window, holding a rolled-up paper like a microphone. John was sitting on the edge of the couch, his socks mismatched, his face unusually serious. "What if someone says you're not our mum?" Kevin asked quietly. Evelyn paused. The question was innocent, but it landed with a weight. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He just wanted to be ready. Evelyn set down the tray. She walked over, crouched in front of them, eye level now. "Then we say," she said slowly, "she's not. But we asked her to come." John nodded, memorizing it like a line in a play. Kevin twisted the pretend mic in his hands. "What if someone laughs?" Evelyn softened. "They won't." "But what if they do?" She looked at him for a long moment, touched his wrist gently. "Then we stay kind, and we tell the truth." John picked up his toy dinosaur and held it like a guest in the pretend classroom. Kevin cleared his throat. "This is Evelyn," he announced. "She helps us remember." Evelyn smiled, but it trembled. They practiced again, this time with silly voices. John made one of the dinosaurs a teacher with a funny accent. Kevin pretended to offer biscuits to imaginary classmates. Their laughter filled the room. Not loud, not wild, but pure, real. And down the hallway, just out of sight, Jonathan stood still. He'd come down the stairs for coffee, phone in hand, but the sound of Kevin's voice had stopped him mid-step. He didn't mean to listen, but he didn't move. He heard everything. "This is Evelyn. She helps us remember." And Evelyn's reply, "I'm not your mum. Just someone who loves you enough to stand where it hurts." He leaned against the wall, and for a moment he didn't feel like the head of the house, or the man who built a billion-dollar company. He felt like someone who had no idea how to rebuild what was gone. The laughter died down eventually. The boys ran upstairs. Evelyn stayed behind, folding their little blazers, brushing crumbs from the couch. She didn't know he'd been there. Later that evening, as she was wiping the kitchen table, Jonathan walked in. He looked tired. Not in the way sleep fixes, but the kind of tired that starts in the soul. He nodded toward the counter. "The school still hasn't called." Evelyn straightened slightly. "I can follow up in the morning." He hesitated. "If it gets approved," he said slowly, "you'll need something proper to wear. It's a formal event." Evelyn's hand stilled. She wasn't sure if it was permission or warning. "Of course," she said softly. "I have something." Another pause. The air between them was full, not of anger, but of things neither of them knew how to name. He looked down at the floor, then at the card still sitting on the counter. "They really want you there," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "They do." He rubbed the back of his neck, glanced once toward the staircase. "I don't want them to feel confused." "They're not," she replied. "Not about this." He looked at her, really looked this time. She wasn't trying to take anything. That was clear now. She was just there, still standing, still gentle, still saying yes to something that wasn't hers to carry, but she carried it anyway. Jonathan gave a small nod, then left the room. She didn't follow, didn't press. She just stood in the quiet, hands resting on the chair backs, eyes soft with something unspoken. And behind her, the folded card still sat on the counter, unopened, but not forgotten. The morning of the tea arrived grey and quiet. A soft drizzle misted the windows, the kind London kind, not enough to need an umbrella, just enough to blur the glass. The twins were ready before anyone asked them to be. John buttoned Kevin's blazer. Kevin fixed John's hair. They didn't speak much, not out of sadness, but focus. Today mattered, not because it was Mother's Day, but because she said yes. Evelyn stood at the bedroom mirror in a powder blue dress she hadn't worn since her cousin's wedding. It wasn't new, but it felt new today. She kept her hair loose, simple, pressed down the nerves in her chest with soft, steady hands. Downstairs, the twins waited by the door, polished shoes tapping the floor in uneven rhythm. When she stepped into the foyer, they both looked up. Their smiles were small, but full. Kevin held out a tiny flower, pulled from the garden that morning. John held the card, the same one, still folded, still creased. "You look like a memory," John said quietly. Evelyn blinked. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't have to. The driver opened the door without comment. They rode in silence. Not heavy silence, the kind that holds something sacred. At St. Edmund's, the reception hall buzzed with light chatter. Linen tablecloths, paper crafts, mums in heels and soft perfume. The room was warm but tight. Every seat claimed, every glance loaded with unspoken comparisons. When Evelyn stepped in, hand with the twins, the room noticed, not with shouting, but with stillness. Some eyes turned, some lips pressed together, others just stared. She felt it, not in her skin, but in her breath. But she didn't stop walking. Neither did they. The teacher smiled warmly. "Kevin, John, we're so happy to have your guest." Guest. Not mother, not mistake. Guest. It was enough. They found their table. The boys climbed into their seats, placing the card carefully in the center. Evelyn smoothed her dress, sat down, folded her hands. She could feel it again, the weight of being seen in a room where she was never meant to belong, not by title, not by dress code, not by the invisible lines that divide people like her from people like them. And then the door opened. Jonathan stepped in, not rushed, not late, just unannounced. He hadn't said he was coming, not to her, not to the boys. He wore a dark suit, tie slightly askew, eyes already scanning the room before the door had even closed behind him. And when he saw them, the twins and Evelyn at the far table, he stopped, mid-step. Everything slowed. Evelyn met his eyes. Her body froze, not out of shame, but out of not knowing what he would do. The boys turned, lit up. "Dad!" Kevin called. "Come sit." Jonathan didn't answer. He was still watching Evelyn. She stood slowly, unsure. "This is Evelyn," John said, louder now, "to help us remember." And something cracked, not in the room, but in him. The air didn't shift, the music didn't change, but he did. Jonathan stepped forward, walked to the table. His eyes were tired, but present. He looked at Evelyn, at the card, at the two boys he somehow felt farther from than ever. And then, quietly, he clapped. Once, twice. And the room exhaled. It wasn't a speech, wasn't a declaration, just a man letting go of what he couldn't control, long enough to accept what he didn't expect. He pulled out the last chair, sat down beside them. Evelyn blinked back something she didn't want to name. The twins reached for the biscuits. Jonathan poured the tea, and for the first time in 7 years, the table felt full. The photo wasn't planned, but someone took it anyway. A parent, maybe 2 tables over, captured the moment just after Jonathan sat down. The twin boys in blazers, Evelyn in powder blue, a paper heart on the table, and a billionaire father quietly clapping. It wasn't posed, it wasn't dramatic, but it said enough. And by evening the image was already circulating, first in the school's private parent group, then quietly shared, then forwarded, and then judged. Evelyn didn't know about it that night. She was in the kitchen, humming faintly as she wiped down the counter. The boys were upstairs arguing about which dinosaur got the top bunk. Jonathan was in the study, scrolling through emails that felt colder than usual. It wasn't until he opened a message from a board member, short, clipped, that the headline stopped him. Billionaire brings MAID to Mother's Day event. Touching or troubling? He froze. Below it, the photo. Slightly blurred, but clear enough to recognize her, them, him. He kept reading. Sweet or staged? What boundaries exist between help and home? Children deserve structure, not confusion. And then from someone he once considered a friend. This feels performative. Jonathan closed the laptop, stared at the blank wall across the room. He felt the rise of something in his chest, not rage, not shame, something quieter, more dangerous. Doubt. Downstairs, Evelyn hadn't noticed the silence yet. She was still riding the soft high of the day, the way the boys beamed when he walked in, the sound of their laughter clinking against teacups, the surprise of Jonathan's chair pulling out, his presence, not forced, just real. She'd carried that moment all day, until she turned from the sink and found him standing in the kitchen doorway. His face was unreadable, not cold, just closed. I saw the photo, he said. She blinked. What photo? It's online. Parents are talking. She straightened, put the towel down. He stepped closer. Some think it crossed a line. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She didn't know what line he meant. I didn't ask for it to be public, she said carefully. I didn't even know. I know. His voice was low, controlled, but not angry. Just tired. I should have expected it, he muttered. Should have seen it coming. Evelyn's breath caught. The warmth from earlier faded like breath on glass. I was only there because they asked me. Her voice broke slightly. I didn't go to be seen. I went to show up. Jonathan looked at her then. Not past her, not through her. At her. I know, he said. And yet, the silence that followed, it felt like distance. Later, in her room, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed. The dress hung neatly on the closet door. The flower the twins gave her lay drying on a paper towel by the window. She scrolled through her phone, then stopped. There it was, the post, shared, reposted, captioned. She didn't read all the comments, she couldn't, but one line lingered. Some roles should remain clear. It's dangerous when children forget who's who. She didn't cry. Not then. But she did sit back against the headboard and close her eyes. She'd known this moment might come. People always had opinions about things they didn't understand. But still, it hurt. Not because of the words, but because she didn't know if Jonathan had her back now that the room was empty. Upstairs, the twins were already asleep, but John had left something on his pillow, a folded note. Jonathan saw it when he came in to check on them. He opened it slowly. Crayon. Again. Thank you for clapping. We were scared, but you made it okay. He stared at it for a long time. The noise of the world was still in his head, the whispers, the questions, but this was quiet and true. A child's way of saying, you showed up. He folded the note and tucked it into his pocket, then turned off the light, stood in the doorway for a beat longer than usual. His sons slept soundly, but the world outside had begun to stir. The house was quieter than usual. Not empty, just heavy. After the tea and the post, after the headlines and the strange looks at school drop-off, the world didn't crash. It just cooled, like the warmth had taken a step back. Evelyn kept her rhythm. She still folded the boys' clothes with care, still made toast the way Margaret used to, still placed vitamins on the side of their plates like it mattered, but the softness behind it had dimmed, not because she stopped caring, but because something sacred had been touched by people who didn't understand it. And once that happens, even the air feels different. Jonathan moved slower that week, stayed home more, not in a way that said, I'm present, but in a way that said, I'm trying to understand something I don't know how to say out loud. He watched more than he spoke, noticed the way Kevin leaned into Evelyn when his stomach hurt, how John looked at her for approval before telling a joke. These weren't things she taught them. They were things they trusted her with. And that trust, he hadn't seen it clearly until the world told him he shouldn't. The form came home on Friday, tucked in the twins' homework folder. Evelyn found it on the kitchen counter, a simple white paper with boxes and check marks. School emergency contact update. She scanned the usual fields, parent name, phone number, email, then paused. Under primary guardian if parent is unavailable, a name had already been written, Evelyn James, in pencil, careful letters, child's handwriting. The boys hadn't asked, they didn't tell her, they just wrote it, because in their eyes it made sense. When things went wrong, when something hurt, she was the one they called. She stood at the counter, the form still in her hand, staring at her name as if it didn't belong there, but also couldn't be erased. Not because of ego, but because of love. The real kind. Quiet, steady, uninvited, but never unwanted. When Jonathan came downstairs, she almost didn't show him. But something in her said, "Don't hide this." So she placed it on the counter, not dramatic, not folded, and stepped back. He entered the room, rubbing sleep from his eyes, one hand still buttoning his cuff. Saw the paper, picked it up. His eyes scanned quickly, then stopped. Evelyn didn't speak, just waited. He looked at the penciled name, the small letters, the soft mark his sons had made. He said nothing, just stood there, holding the form, the morning sun bleeding in through the window, dust catching in the light like floating threads. Finally, he spoke, but it wasn't what she expected. "She's who they call when they're scared." His voice was quiet, almost unsure. Evelyn met his eyes, said nothing, just nodded. Once, no defense, no explanation. He turned back to the form, looked at the line again, then reached for a pen. No rush, just a steady signature next to her name. Jonathan Scott. The ink pressed into the paper. Permanent, final. Not adoption, not a title, but something else. Permission, for love to stretch, for grief to share its weight, for family to mean more than biology or blood. He set the pen down, folded the form, then looked at her. Not guarded, not boss to employee, just man to woman, parent to parent. "Thank you," he said, "for catching what I couldn't." And Evelyn, still standing there in yesterday's sweater and soft eyes, simply nodded. "I didn't catch it," she whispered. "They handed it to me." That night, after dinner, the boys ran to the fridge to hang their drawings like they always did. But this time Evelyn added something beside them, a small magnet, a scrap of paper, 3 words in her handwriting. "Love lives here." It didn't ask for attention, didn't shine, but it stayed, and it held. The recipe book hadn't moved from its place on the counter. Jonathan hadn't asked her to put it away. Evelyn hadn't rushed to return it. It stayed, like a photograph you don't know whether to frame or close in a drawer. On Tuesday morning, Evelyn opened it again. The boys were at school. The house was quiet. The pages still smelled faintly like cinnamon and old paper. Some were stiff from years of sugar and spills. Others were soft at the edges, corners bent like someone had turned them again and again. She was searching for Margaret's pancake recipe. The boys had asked for it. "Not just any pancakes," Kevin had said. "Mum's ones, the ones that feel warm on the inside." Evelyn didn't know what that meant, but she told them she'd try. As she flipped through the book, a loose piece of paper slipped out from the back, yellowed slightly, folded into thirds. She paused, unfolded it carefully. At the top, in Margaret's familiar handwriting, it read, "To whoever helps them laugh when I can't." Evelyn's breath caught, her fingers trembled. The letter was short, but it reached deeper than anything she could have prepared for. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it, and someone had to step into the silence. Don't try to be me. Don't try to erase what they've lost. Just be there. For their laughter, for the days when they need someone to say, "You're safe." Mothers are not names, they're actions. Evelyn sat down slowly, the letter still in her hands. She didn't cry at first. She just let the silence fill the room. It felt like Margaret had been here the whole time, not haunting, not watching, just trusting. And somehow, Evelyn had walked into that trust without even knowing it. She read the letter again, then a third time, and when the tears finally came, they were quiet, not from guilt, not from grief, but from the overwhelming weight of permission to stay, to love, to belong, not because she earned it, but because Margaret made room for her. That evening, Evelyn taped the letter to the fridge, tucked in behind the boys' drawings and the lunch menu. Not on display, but not hidden. Jonathan noticed it as soon as he walked in. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and something warm. The boys were dancing around the island, laughing, cheeks flushed, and there it was, the letter. He stepped closer, read it once, didn't speak. Evelyn watched from across the room, heart in her throat. She didn't know if it was okay, if she'd crossed a line. But when he turned, his eyes were soft, no defense, no confusion, just stillness. "She really wrote that?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "I found it in the back of the recipe book." He looked at the letter again, ran a hand through his hair. "She knew," he whispered. "Even back then, she knew someone else would have to finish what she started." Evelyn said nothing, just let the moment breathe. The boys laughed in the background, the sound of socks sliding on tile, a spoon clattering into the sink. Jonathan stepped back, sat at the kitchen table, watched them. Then, after a long pause, he said, almost to himself, "I thought I had to do this alone." Evelyn leaned against the counter, arms folded, voice low. "No one's meant to do this alone." He nodded, eyes still on the twins. "They love you," he said. Finally. Evelyn looked down, swallowing the emotion that rose too fast. "I love them back." It wasn't dramatic, wasn't a revelation. It was just truth. Standing there, steady. Something shifted then. Not loudly, but deeply, like the floor of the house settling after a storm. Like two people finally standing in the same room with the same story. And though nothing had been promised, nothing signed or sealed, something was being rewritten, not by replacement, not by force, but by love, learning how to grow around what was lost. Spring came late that year. The cherry trees at St. Edmund's didn't bloom until after the school changed the sign. The announcement came in a short letter home. "Beginning next year, our annual Mother's Day event will be renamed Family Day of Love." There were no meetings, no press releases, just quiet change, the kind that begins with a moment someone couldn't forget. The boys didn't ask why. They just smiled when Evelyn read it out loud, and Kevin whispered, "It's better this way." A few weeks later, the school invited families to plant a memory tree, one for each class, one for the people who couldn't be there anymore and the ones who showed up anyway. Jonathan came in early from work that day. No briefcase, no suit. He helped Evelyn carry the time capsule the boys made, a shoebox wrapped in red paper, held together with more tape than necessary. Inside, a drawing of their mother, a copy of the paper heart, a recipe card for Margaret's pancakes, jam stains and all, and a photo of the three of them at the tea, the one where Evelyn's eyes were just starting to water, and Jonathan's hand rested gently on the back of her chair. The boys lowered the box into the earth. The principal said a few words, not too many, just enough. Then they planted the tree, a Yoshino cherry, same kind Margaret used to love. Evelyn knelt in the soil beside the boys, smoothing the dirt with both hands. Jonathan stood behind her, then slowly joined them. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His hand brushed hers once, quietly, without hesitation. She didn't pull away. Back at the house, the fridge was full of new drawings. Kevin had drawn the tea party again, this time with Evelyn in the middle, not off to the side. John had drawn the tree, pink blossoms falling like confetti, a small red heart buried under the roots. The letter from Margaret stayed taped above them, still a little wrinkled, still holding. Some nights Evelyn would reread it when no one was around, not because she needed the words again, but because they reminded her she wasn't borrowing this life. She'd been invited into it. One night, weeks after the tree was planted, Jonathan walked into the kitchen after the boys had gone to bed. Evelyn was at the sink, rinsing mugs, her sleeves rolled, hair loose, tired in that familiar way. He leaned against the counter. "I kept thinking someone else would come," he said quietly. Evelyn looked up. Someone else? A person who made it all make sense, who had the right answers, the right title. He paused. "I thought I was waiting for Margaret, or someone like her, but she's not coming back." Evelyn didn't speak, just listened. Jonathan looked at her, not just at her presence, but her place. "She was everything," he said. "And I thought if I held on tight enough, maybe I could be both parents, but I can't, and maybe I was never supposed to." Evelyn wiped her hands on the towel, stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to be everything." She paused. "You just have to be here." Jonathan nodded, looked down for a moment. Then, carefully, reached into his pocket. He pulled out something folded, the boy's note, from the night of the tea. "Thank you for clapping. We were scared, but you made it okay." He unfolded it again, set it gently on the counter between them. "I don't know what we are," he said, "or where this goes, but I know you make it okay." Evelyn looked at the note, then at him, not with answers, but with peace. And maybe that was enough. The next morning the twins woke to something new on the fridge, not a recipe, not a schedule, just a note in Evelyn's handwriting. "Love lives here always." And beside it, in Jonathan's, "And it's welcome to stay." If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of someone you lost, someone who stayed, or someone who quietly showed up when they didn't have to, then maybe you understand now. Love isn't about replacing what's gone, it's about choosing to remain, even when you weren't expected. Here at Elevated Heart Stories, we tell the kind of stories that live where words fall short, the ones that reach into silence and come back with something real. So if this story meant something to you, don't just click away. Subscribe, like, share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone, and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Because from wherever you are, if your heart is open, you belong here. This is Elevated Heart Stories.